Hi everyone, welcome back to the Carnival Flowers video series. Natasha here from Buttonnose Crochet, and in this video we're going to be doing part 6, which will be the flowers that will start creating the corners. Now each flower has been made individually, so you will need to fasten off each colour before you continue on. Now if you're using gradient yarns, I would suggest doing each round in each corner and then do the next round in each corner. So that way your gradient yarn will have a gradient effect on each flower and it would be even. Now to do stitch counts, what we're going to do is each flower uses 13 stitches either side of the chain 2 space. So you will have 71 stitches remaining between the last slip stitch and the last slip stitch of the flower and the first slip stitch of the next flower. So if you want to mark that, the 13th stitch, and then on either side, and then count that you got 71 stitches before you start, you're more than welcome to. Now also too, if you want to read through these few rows, you can place stitch markers at the beginning of each row, and if you want a more secure way of securing the rounds, just slip stitch an extra stitch before your stitch marker. So for row 37 it says that it starts 3 stitches back from the chain 2 space. So for a more secure slip stitch, start in the 4th stitch back and slip stitch in the 3rd and 4th slip stitch, 3rd and 4th stitches, and then do your double crochets and then slip stitch in the 3rd and 4th after the chain 2 space. So you can do that if you want, so that way it's a little bit more secure. Otherwise it will look a little bit flimsy until you're actually sewing your ends. So they're my tips for this part of the video, part of the pattern I mean. That each corner is made individually. If you want your slip stitches to be a bit more secure, slip stitch into the previous stitch that is indicated plus the stitch that's indicated, and repeat that on the other side. And also to if you want, mark out your 13 stitches and then count 71, so that way you know that your 13th stitch is in the right place before you start the corner. So with that in mind, let's start row 37. Okay, so we're starting on row 37. I'm using Eelde, and the pattern note says that it starts in the 3rd slip stitch, sorry, the 3rd stitch before the chain 2 space. So if you want a more secure slip stitch, just go to the 4th stitch and make a slip stitch, and then slip stitch into the 3rd. So you got 2 slip stitches. Next, what we want to do is make 6 double crochet in the chain 2 space. So we're skipping these first 2 stitches. So 6 double crochet. And then we're going to skip 2 stitches and slip stitch into the 3rd loop of the 3rd stitch. Now if you've done 2 slip stitches on this side, you want to do 2 slip stitches on this side as well. And then fasten off. And that is row 37. I'm actually liking the 2 slip stitches because it's actually a little bit more sturdier. I've done another corner, and as you can see, it's a lot more looser with only 1 slip stitch. So let's go on to row 38. So row 38, it starts 2 stitches back from row 37, so which is the 5th stitch in row 36, so this stitch here. Now continuing on doing the 2 slip stitches, just slip stitch before that stitch. My end in the way. So we've ended up in the correct stitch there. So 2 stitches back. So 1, 2. Next, what we want to do is chain 1 and front post double crochet around that first double crochet. Chain 1 and repeat front post double crochet, chain 1 to the last double crochet. So pause the video and I'll meet you when I finish this part. Okay, so I've finished with a chain 1, and what we want to do is this side, it finishes 2 stitches after the slip stitch of row 37, but since I've done the 2, it will be the 5th stitch of row 36. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so in the 3rd loop. And then slip stitch in the next and fasten off. If you want to place a stitch marker into the next stitches, so we've got, so the next round starts 2 stitches back, so because we've done 2 slip stitch, it's 1, 2, and do that on the other side. So this would have been our first slip stitch, so 1, 2. Just that way you know which stitch you're going to be where the count is from. So row 39 is actually in the 7th stitch from the chain 2 space of round 36, and then round 40 actually starts in that same stitch, so we won't need to count, and then it goes back 3 and then back 3 again. So if you want to put in stitch markers, you can. Anyway, let's go on to row 39. Okay, row 39 starts in the 7th stitch of round 36. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do 2 slip stitches, so slip stitch before the stitch marker, slip stitch into the next stitch, remove my stitch marker, next what I want to do is double crochet into this first chain 1 space, And then our repeat for this round is front post double crochet around the front post double crochet, 2 double crochet in the chain 1 space. So repeat that to the last, just before your last front post double crochet. So pause the video and I'll meet you at the end here. Okay, next what we want to do is front post double crochet around the next stitch, double crochet in the chain 1 space, and then we're going to slip stitch into that 7th stitch, and I'm going to slip stitch into the next just to make it secure and fasten off. And that is row 39. So our flower is starting to come together. Now the next round, it starts in that same 7th stitch. So I'll put my stitch marker back. So that's the stitch that we're looking for. So let's go on to row 40. Okay, for row 40, it starts in the 7th stitch of round 36. So what we want to do, because I'm doing a 2 slip stitch, get my yarn together, I'm just going to go straight back into that same 3rd loop. Just makes it a lot easier. Okay, that's our, so we slip stitch back into that same stitch. And then what we're going to do is back post single crochet around the double crochet, so this first stitch here, and then we're going to chain 2, skip the front double crochet and back post single crochet around the next 2 stitches, chain 2, skip the front post double crochet. So repeat that over to the last front post double crochet. So back post single crochet around the 2 double crochet, chain 2, skip the front post double crochet. So repeat that to the last front post double crochet. Pause the video and I'll meet you back at the end of the round. Okay, so I've finished my repeat. I've done the chain 2. Next what we want to do is back post single crochet around that double crochet and then slip stitch into the same stitches as the previous round. And that is row 40 complete. So we've done our setup for our popcorns, and I didn't do a chain 2 at the, no, I did it right, sorry, my bad. I'm reading the pattern all confused, but no, we should have 6 chain 2 spaces, just to make sure. You should have 6 chain 2 spaces. If you don't, if you have 7, then you've added chain 2s on either end accidentally. So let's go on to row 41. Okay, so round 41, we're going to be making our treble popcorns. This round is started in the 10th stitch in round 36. So I've got my stitch marker there. So what I want to do is slip stitch into the previous stitch before the stitch marker, and then slip stitch into that stitch with the stitch marker. Next I want to chain 2, skip the next 2 stitches and the back post single crochet and the slip stitches, and make a treble popcorn into that first chain 2 space. So treble popcorn is 6 trebles. And then through the first loop, around the back, put the loop on the hook and pull through. Chain 1 to secure, chain 3, and treble popcorn in the next chain 2 space, chain 3. So repeat that to your last chain 2 space, but only finish with 2 chain, not 3. So pause the video and I'll meet you back after we've made our last popcorn. Okay, so I've done all my treble popcorns. I've done my last one in the chain 2 space. What we want to do is chain 2 and then slip stitch into the 10th stitch. So we're skipping 2 stitches after the first, we're skipping 3 stitches. So this would have been the slip stitch for the previous 2 rows. So skip 2, slip stitch into the next one, and then I'm going to slip stitch into the next one after that, and then fasten off. And that is your treble popcorns. Now your ends might be starting to really get in the way, so if you wanted to sew in your ends, you can, and we'll just do the last round next. So let's go on to row 42. Okay, for row 42, our last row for this part of the pattern, this starts in the 13th stitch from the chain 2 space. So what I'm going to do is slip stitch into the 3rd loop of the stitch before, so the 11th and the 10th. Just remove my stitch marker, and then what we want to do is make a treble double crochet, then a half double crochet in the chain 2 space. So what we've done, we've skipped 2 stitches and the slip stitch, and we've worked into the first chain 2 space. Next, what we want to do is front post single crochet around the popcorn. So this is the start of our repeat. Front post single crochet around the popcorn, half double crochet, double crochet, treble, chain 1, treble, double crochet, half double crochet in the chain 3 space, So repeat that to your second last chain 2 space, so the space before the last popcorn, and I'll pause the video and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've done my group in my second last chain 2 space. Next, what we want to do is make a front post single crochet around the popcorn, and then in the last chain 2 space we'll make a half double crochet, double crochet, treble, and then slip stitch into the 13th stitch, so where I've got my stitch marker, and I'm just going to slip stitch into the next just to make it secure, and then fasten off. Now that is our flower for this part. What we want to do before we continue on to part 7 is place a stitch marker into that third chain 1 space. That is going to be our starting point where the corner will be in the next part. So that's where we'll be starting in part 7. So repeat these 6 rows in each corner, sew in your ends, which I have failed to do as I've gone along, and even if you do one corner, sew in the ends, do it that way, so that way you haven't got 4 corners of 12 ends to sew in, so 24 ends. So I hope you've been able to follow along and understand how to do the corners. So all you need to remember is row 37 starts in the 3rd stitch, row 38 starts in the 5th stitch, row 39 starts in the 7th stitch, row 40 starts in the 7th stitch, row 41 starts in the 10th stitch, and row 42 starts in the 13th stitch. Now remember, if you're doing the 2 slip stitches, you will need to slip stitch in the 1 over. So this is where you need to use your stitch markers. So count your stitches out and then go, right, I'm going to slip stitch in the stitch before the stitch marker, and then slip stitch in the stitch with the stitch marker, and then when you finished your row, you slip stitch into, say, your 13th stitch and 14th stitch. So that way you have a more secure footing and it's not going to pull too much in the corners. So repeat that around, and I will see you in part 7. So thank you for following along, and yeah, basically I hope you enjoyed watching it. Okay, bye.